She was sold with her baby for the price of a saddle, until the cowboy handed over his whole, heard the crack of a rifle shot, shattered the dawn silence, as Katherine Sullivan clutched her 3-month-old daughter tightly to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was 1876, in the unforgiving Texas territory, and she had just become a widow. "He's dead," a gruff voice announced from the doorway of their modest homestead. Frank Dawson, her late husband's business partner, stood silhouetted against the rising sun, his expression hidden beneath the brim of his hat. "Caught a bullet trying to steal horses, left nothing but debts." Katherine's legs gave way beneath her as she sank to the rough wooden floor, her baby Emma whimpering softly against her. Just yesterday, Thomas had kissed her goodbye, promising to return with enough money to last them through winter. Now he was gone, leaving her alone with their infant daughter and apparently a mountain of debt she knew nothing about. "This property, everything in it, it's all mine now," Frank continued, stepping inside uninvited. He surveyed the humble cabin with cold, calculating eyes. "Your husband signed it over as collateral, but I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you until sundown to pack what you can carry." "That can't be true," Katherine whispered, but the papers Frank thrust toward her told a different story. Thomas's signature, clear as day, transferring everything they owned to Frank should he fail to repay his loans. "Please, I have nowhere to go. My baby." Frank's eyes lingered on her for a moment too long. There might be another arrangement. Those words marked the beginning of Katherine Sullivan's descent into hell. Within a week, she had become property rather than person, traded and bartered like cattle. Frank Dawson was not a rancher or a businessman as he'd claimed. He was a ruthless opportunist who trafficked in human misery. And Katherine, with her golden hair and striking green eyes, was a commodity he could sell. The worst day of Katherine's life dawned bright and clear, the Texas sky an innocent blue that seemed to mock her circumstances. She stood trembling in a crowded saloon in the dusty town of Redemption Creek, her baby clutched protectively against her chest, as Frank negotiated with a rat-faced man whose breath reeked of whiskey. "She's strong, can cook, clean, and won't give you no trouble," Frank was saying, as if describing a horse. "Pretty too, as you can see. The baby comes with her or not, your choice." "What's your price?" the man asked, eyeing Katherine like she was a piece of meat. "That fine saddle you rode in on would do it," Frank replied. "I've got a buyer who'll pay good money for craftsmanship like that." Katherine's blood turned to ice. "Sold for the price of a saddle, her and her baby girl." She opened her mouth to scream, to beg, to plead with the other patrons for help. But the words died in her throat as she caught sight of the revolver Frank had partially concealed beneath his coat. But fate, it seemed, had other plans that day. The saloon doors swung open, spilling harsh sunlight across the grimy floor. A tall figure stepped inside, his spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. The room fell silent as the stranger moved toward the bar, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, dusty from the trail. "Whiskey?" he said, his voice deep and quiet. As the bartender poured his drink, the stranger's gaze swept the room, pausing when it reached Katherine and her baby. "Something interesting happening here?" he asked, and though his tone was casual, there was steel beneath it. Frank shifted uncomfortably. "Private business transaction, friend, nothing that concerns you." The stranger took his time sipping his whiskey, then set the glass down with a soft clink. "When a man trades a woman and her child for a saddle in broad daylight, I reckon it becomes everybody's business." The atmosphere in the saloon crackled with tension. Katherine clutched Emma tighter, hope and fear warring within her. "Name's Dawson Reid," the stranger continued, addressing Katherine directly now. "I run cattle north of here, just sold a herd in San Antonio." He turned to Frank. "What's the real debt?" Frank's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy." Dawson didn't flinch. "I'm making it my concern." "Now how much?" $500, Frank said with a sneer. "More than you've likely seen in your life." A ghost of a smile touched Dawson's lips as he reached into his coat, producing a worn leather pouch. "I'll pay the woman's debt, and then some." "She's already spoken for," Frank protested, but his eyes had locked onto the pouch. "I'm offering more," Dawson stated simply. "My entire herd, the proceeds anyway, $2,000. He placed a stack of bills on the bar. For the lady's freedom and whatever paper you've got claiming her. The saloon erupted in murmurs. Katherine stared at this stranger, this Dawson Reid, with disbelief. Why would any man pay such a sum for someone he didn't know? Frank hesitated only briefly before snatching the money. "She's all yours, Cowboy," he said with a cruel laugh. "Hope she's worth it." Katherine stood frozen as Frank thrust a crumpled document at Dawson and strode out of the saloon. The stranger, her new owner, approached slowly as if afraid of frightening her. "Mrs. Sullivan," she whispered. "Katherine Sullivan." Dawson nodded, his blue eyes kind beneath the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've got a wagon outside. There's a place you can rest at my ranch while you figure out your next move." Katherine stiffened. "And what will you expect in return?" Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like sorrow. "Nothing, madam. I don't own you. Nobody does." He held up the paper Frank had given him and tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. "You're free to go wherever you please." "But it's a hard country for a woman alone with a child. I'm offering safe passage and shelter. Nothing more." Emma began to fuss, and Katherine bounced her gently, studying the man before her. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his face weathered by sun and wind, but there was nothing in his steady gaze that frightened her. After the nightmare of the past week, Katherine found herself doing something she'd thought impossible, trusting a stranger. "Thank you, Mr. Reid," she said softly. "We accept your offer of shelter." And so began their journey, Katherine Sullivan and her baby daughter riding in Dawson Reid's wagon, heading north into the vast, unforgiving beauty of the Texas frontier. Neither knew then how their lives would intertwine, or that the price of a saddle and a herd of cattle would be the beginning rather than the end of their story. The journey to Dawson's ranch took 3 days, following winding trails through rugged country. Katherine spent most of it in wary silence, tending to Emma and wondering what awaited them. Dawson didn't press her to talk, respecting her need for distance, but in the evenings when they made camp, he would sometimes tell stories of his travels as they sat by the fire. "My pa came west with nothing but dreams and determination," he explained on their second night. "Built the ranch from scratch. When he died 5 years back, I took over, been expanding ever since." "And your mother?" Katherine asked, surprising herself with her curiosity. A shadow crossed Dawson's face. "Lost her when I was 12. Fever took her." "I'm sorry," Katherine murmured, recognizing the old pain in his voice. It matched her own. She'd lost her parents to influenza when she was 17, leaving her alone in the world until she'd met Thomas. "It was a long time ago," Dawson replied, stirring the fire with a stick. "Ranch is doing well now. Got good men working for me, decent herd, or had," he added with a wry smile. The reminder of what he'd sacrificed for her and Emma made Katherine uncomfortable. "Mr. Reid, I still don't understand why you did what you did back there. That money, it was everything you had." Dawson was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames dance. "My ma used to say there are moments in life that test what kind of man you are. That was one of mine." He looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire. "No decent person could stand by and watch what was happening to you. But your entire herd, cattle, can be replaced," he said simply. "A person's freedom can't." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes and quickly looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "We'll work to repay you somehow." "That's not necessary, Mrs. Sullivan." "Katherine," she corrected softly. "Please call me Katherine." He nodded, a small smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "Katherine then, and I'm Dawson." On the third day, they crested a hill and Katherine caught her first glimpse of the Reid Ranch sprawling across the valley below. It wasn't the largest she'd seen, but it was well-maintained, with sturdy corrals, a large barn, and a 2-story house that looked almost grand compared to the cabin she'd shared with Thomas. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Home," Dawson said simply, but there was pride in his voice. As they approached, 2 men rode out to meet them, ranch hands curious about their boss's early return. Their expressions registered surprise at the sight of Katherine and the baby, but neither commented directly. "Jake, Miguel, this is Mrs. Sullivan and her daughter," Dawson introduced them. "They'll be staying with us for a while." "Madam," The men touched their hats respectfully. "Boss, about the herd," the older one, Jake, began. "We'll talk later," Dawson cut him off, steering the wagon toward the house. A woman in her 50s emerged onto the porch as they pulled up, thin and weathered, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her sharp eyes took in Katherine and Emma with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. Winters, my housekeeper," Dawson explained. "Mrs. Winters, this is Mrs. Sullivan and her daughter Emma. They'll be occupying the guest room for a while." The housekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "I'll prepare it right away, Mr. Reid." That first night at the ranch, Katherine bathed Emma in real hot water for the first time in weeks, then herself, washing away the dust and fear of their journey. The clean nightgown Mrs. Winters had provided was slightly too large but blessedly soft, and the bed in the guest room felt like heaven after sleeping on the ground. Yet despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The events of the past week kept replaying in her mind: Thomas's death, Frank's betrayal, the horror of being sold, and then Dawson's unexpected intervention. What would become of her and Emma now? She couldn't stay here indefinitely, living on charity, but she had nowhere else to go, no family, no money. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Emma, and cracked the door open to find Dawson standing there, a steaming mug in his hand. "Thought you might be having trouble sleeping," he said, offering the mug. "Mrs. Winters's special tea works wonders." Katherine accepted it gratefully. "Thank you." "How's the little one?" he asked, nodding toward the sleeping baby. "Exhausted, but well." Katherine hesitated, then added, "Mr. Reid Dawson, I've been thinking about what happens next. I can't impose on your generosity forever." His expression softened. "There's no rush, Katherine. Winter's coming and the trails will be hard. Stay until spring at least. But I need to contribute something. I won't be a charity case." Dawson considered this, respect showing in his eyes. Mrs. Winters could use help with the house. And come spring, we always need extra hands for calving season. But that's your choice, not an obligation. Katherine nodded, relieved. "Thank you for everything. Get some rest," he said gently. Things have a way of looking clearer in the morning light. As the weeks passed, Katherine slowly settled into life at the Reid Ranch. She took over much of the cooking from Mrs. Winters, who seemed relieved to delegate the task, and kept the house spotless. Emma thrived in the stable environment, growing plumper by the day, her smiles coming more frequently. Dawson, Katherine noticed, made himself scarce most days, riding out at dawn and returning at dusk. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance. It was only with Emma that he seemed to lower his guard, making silly faces at the baby when he thought no one was watching, or gently touching her tiny hand with his weathered finger. One evening in late November, Katherine found him on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. Snow had begun to fall earlier that day, the first of the season, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, joining him with Emma bundled against her chest. Dawson nodded. "First snow always makes everything look clean and new." "Like a fresh start," Katherine agreed softly. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "How are you settling in?" "Truly, better than I could have hoped," she admitted. "Everyone has been kind, especially you." A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "It's nothing." "It's everything," Katherine corrected him. "You saved us, Dawson." He looked away, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same. "But they didn't. You did." Katherine shifted Emma to her other arm. "The men were talking today." "About the cattle you sold to help us." Dawson stiffened slightly. "They shouldn't gossip." "They weren't gossiping. They were worried. Jake mentioned it was nearly your entire herd. We've got enough breeding stock left. We'll rebuild. But it will take years," Katherine pressed. "Years of work lost because of us." Dawson turned to face her fully then, his expression earnest. "Not lost, Katherine. Never think that. What's a herd of cattle compared to a human life, to your freedom, to this little one's future?" He gestured to Emma, who was watching him with curious eyes. "Some things are worth more than money or cattle or land." Katherine felt something shift inside her, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the shawl wrapped around her shoulders. For the first time since Thomas's death, She found herself truly looking at another man, seeing not just his actions but his character, his heart. And what a heart it was. "Will you hold her?" she asked suddenly, offering Emma to him. "She seems fascinated by you." Dawson hesitated, uncertainty flashing across his face. "I'm not sure it's easy," Katherine encouraged, gently transferring the baby to his arms. "Just support her head like that." His large hands cradled Emma with surprising tenderness, his expression transforming with wonder as the baby cooed up at him. "She's so small," he murmured. "But strong," Katherine said. "Like her mother has to be." Dawson looked up at her then, his blue eyes intense. "You are strong, Katherine. Stronger than anyone I've ever known." The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. For a moment, they stood there in the falling snow, the three of them forming a tableau that looked remarkably like a family. Then Emma sneezed, breaking the spell. "We should get her inside," Dawson said, carefully handing the baby back to Katherine, his fingers brushing against hers in the process. "Yes," she agreed, trying to ignore the tingling sensation where their skin had touched. "Good night, Dawson." "Good night, Katherine." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Katherine found herself wondering what it might be like to belong here permanently, not as a guest or a charity case, but as something more. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Winter descended on the ranch with a vengeance, bringing howling blizzards and temperatures that froze the water in the troughs. The work never ceased. Cattle needed feeding, horses required care, and the endless battle against the cold consumed everyone's energy. Katherine took on more responsibilities, determined to earn her keep. She learned to mend harnesses alongside Jake's wife Clara, who lived in a small cabin nearby and had become something of a friend. She helped with the accounting ledgers when she discovered Dawson's reluctance to manage that side of the business. And every evening, she had a hot meal waiting when the men returned from their frozen labors. Christmas approached, bringing with it a melancholy that Katherine couldn't shake. It would be Emma's first Christmas, but also their first without Thomas. Despite his flaws, and she was beginning to realize there had been many, he had been her husband, Emma's father. 3 days before Christmas, Katherine was in the kitchen kneading dough for bread when she heard boots stomping on the porch. Dawson entered, carrying a small pine tree over his shoulder, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Thought the house could use some cheer," he explained, setting it up in the corner of the parlor. "Used to be a tradition when Ma was alive." "It's perfect," Katherine said, wiping flour from her hands. "Emma and I were just saying this morning that it was beginning to look a lot like Christmas, but something was missing." Dawson's eyes crinkled at the corners. Was she now quite the conversationalist for 5 months old? "She's very advanced," Katherine replied with mock seriousness, enjoying the way his smile deepened in response. Together, they decorated the tree with simple ornaments Mrs. Winters produced from a dusty box: wooden stars, dried berries strung on thread, paper angels yellowed with age. As they worked, Katherine found herself humming Christmas carols, and to her surprise, Dawson occasionally joined in with a pleasant baritone. "You have a nice voice," she commented. He ducked his head, embarrassed. "Don't get much cause to use it." "You should sing more often," Katherine said, then added impulsively, "Emma loves music. Sometimes it's the only thing that will settle her when she's fussy." "I'll remember that," Dawson promised, and something in his tone made Katherine believe he would. Christmas Eve arrived with clearing skies and a brilliant moon that turned the snow-covered landscape into a silver wonderland. After dinner, everyone gathered in the parlor: Dawson, Katherine with Emma, Mrs. Winters, Jake and Clara, Miguel and the other hands who hadn't gone to town. Clara played carols on the old piano, while Dawson read the Christmas story from a Bible that had clearly belonged to his mother, its pages thin and well-worn. Katherine watched him as he read, his deep voice giving weight to the familiar words. He'd shaved for the occasion and worn his good shirt, and in the warm glow of the lamps, she thought he looked handsome in a way that made her heart beat faster. When had that happened? When had she started seeing him not just as her rescuer, but as a man? Later, after the others had gone and Emma was asleep in her cradle, Katherine and Dawson sat alone by the fire, the Christmas tree twinkling in the corner. "I have something for you," Dawson said quietly, reaching into his pocket. It's not much, but… He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket on a thin chain. Dawson, she breathed, opening it to find it empty, waiting for memories to fill it. It's beautiful. It was my mother's, he explained. Thought you might want to put a snippet of Emma's hair inside to keep close to your heart. The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to her eyes. I don't have anything for you, she admitted. You've given this house life again, Dawson said simply. That's more than enough. Katherine looked up at him, really looked, and saw in his eyes what he wasn't saying, that somehow, without either of them planning it, she and Emma had become precious to him. May I? He asked, taking the locket. Katherine nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers were gentle as they brushed against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter chill. When she turned back to thank him, their faces were closer than she'd expected. For a heartbeat, Katherine thought he might kiss her, wanted him to, she realized with a jolt of surprise. But Dawson drew back, rising to his feet. It's getting late, he said, his voice rough. Merry Christmas, Katherine. Merry Christmas, Dawson, she replied softly, watching him go with a curious mixture of disappointment and relief. Whatever was growing between them, neither was ready to acknowledge it yet. That night, as she drifted off to sleep with Emma breathing peacefully beside her, Katherine's fingers found the locket at her throat. For the first time since Thomas's death, the future didn't look quite so bleak. January brought bitter cold and a mysterious illness that swept through the ranch. First Miguel fell ill with a raging fever, then 2 more hands, then Mrs. Winters. Katherine found herself pressed into service as nurse, making endless pots of broth and applying cold compresses to burning foreheads. You should keep Emma away, Dawson warned her, concern etched on his face. If she catches this, I've been careful, Katherine assured him. Clara's been watching her while I tend to the others, but fate had other plans. 3 days into the outbreak, Katherine woke to find Emma burning with fever, her tiny body racked with coughs. Dawson. She cried, rushing downstairs with the baby in her arms, panic making her voice shrill. Emma's sick. He appeared from the kitchen, immediately abandoning the coffee he'd been pouring. One look at the baby's flushed face and he was in motion, grabbing his coat. I'm riding for the doctor, he announced, already heading for the door. It's 15 miles to town in a blizzard, Katherine protested, fear for him now mingling with her fear for Emma. I'll make it, he said grimly. Keep her cool as you can, I'll be back before dark. True to his word, Dawson returned as the sun was setting, half frozen but with the doctor in tow. By then, Emma's condition had worsened, her breathing labored, her cries weakened to whimpers that tore at Katherine's heart. The doctor, a gruff older man named Wilson, examined the baby carefully, his expression giving away nothing until he'd finished. Pneumonia, he diagnosed. Seen a lot of it this winter. She's very young but strong. Will she? Katherine couldn't finish the question. Dr. Wilson's eyes softened. Next 24 hours will tell. Keep her warm, get fluids in her if you can. Steam helps boil water and let her breathe the vapor. He left medicines and instructions, then departed to see the other patients, promising to return the following day. Katherine sat by Emma's cradle, singing softly through her tears, praying as she hadn't since she was a girl. Dawson never left their side. He built up the fire, brought food Katherine couldn't eat, and whenever she needed to rest, he took her place watching over Emma. In the darkest hours of the night, when the baby's breathing became so labored Katherine thought each breath might be her last, it was Dawson who kept her from falling apart. She's a fighter, he said, his hand warm and steady on Katherine's shoulder. Like her mother. I can't lose her, Katherine whispered. She's all I have. Dawson knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. You have me, he said simply, for whatever that's worth. Katherine looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. He loved Emma. And perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to love her too. It's worth everything, she replied, her voice breaking. Dawn broke with Emma's fever finally easing, her breathing less tortured. By afternoon, she was taking small sips of sweetened water, and by evening her eyes were clearer, focusing on Katherine's face. She's going to be all right, Dr. Wilson confirmed on his return visit. Keep her warm and quiet for a few more days, but the worst has passed." The relief was so intense Katherine thought her legs might give way. Dawson must have sensed it, because his arm came around her waist, supporting her. "Thank you, doctor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." After the doctor left, Katherine put Emma, now sleeping peacefully, in her cradle. When she turned, she found Dawson watching them both, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "You should rest," she told him. "You've barely slept in 2 days." "I needed to be sure she was safe," he replied. "That you both were." The simple honesty in his words undid her completely. Katherine stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. After a moment's surprise, his arms came around her, holding her close. "Thank you," she murmured against the rough fabric of his shirt, "for riding through that storm, for staying with us, for everything." His hand came up to stroke her hair, the gesture tender and protective at once. "I'd ride through worse for you and Emma," he said, his voice a rumble she could feel against her cheek. "Much worse." Katherine pulled back just enough to look up at him, to see the truth of his words written in his eyes. This time, when the moment stretched between them, neither looked away. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, Dawson lowered his head. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely there, a question, not a demand. Katherine answered by rising on her toes, deepening the contact, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster, surprise and something like wonder in their expressions. "I didn't plan that," Dawson said softly. "Neither did I," Katherine admitted, "but I'm glad it happened." He smiled then, a true smile that transformed his whole face. "So am I." The illness left as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving everyone weakened but recovering. Life on the ranch gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but with one significant change: the careful distance Dawson had maintained from Katherine was gone. Now he sought her company openly, joining her for walks when weather permitted, reading to both her and Emma in the evenings, finding small ways to be near her throughout the day. For her part, Katherine found herself looking forward to these moments, storing them up like treasures. The grief over Thomas was still there, but it had changed shape, become something she could carry without being crushed by it. In its place, something new was growing, fragile still, but full of promise. February brought the first hints of thaw, patches of ground appearing through the melting snow. It also brought a letter that changed everything. Katherine was in the parlor, mending one of Dawson's shirts while Emma played on a blanket nearby, when he returned from a rare trip to town. "Mail came through," he announced, handing her an envelope. "This one's for you." Katherine stared at it in surprise. "No one knows I'm here." "Return address says Landry and Sons, attorneys at law, San Antonio," Dawson noted. With trembling fingers, Katherine opened the letter, quickly scanning its contents. Her face went pale. "What is it?" Dawson asked, alarmed. "It's about Thomas," she said, her voice faint. "His death. Apparently he had a life insurance policy I knew nothing about. The attorneys have been trying to locate me for months." She looked up at Dawson, stunned. "There's money, Dawson, a lot of money." He sat down heavily in the chair opposite her. "How much?" $5,000, she whispered. The sum was staggering enough to buy land, build a house, support herself and Emma for years. Dawson was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "That's wonderful news, Katherine. You and Emma will be secure." But there was something in his voice, a forced lightness that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes," she agreed, still processing the implications. "We could go anywhere, do anything. Where will you go?" He asked, the question casual but his gaze intent. Katherine looked around the room that had become home over the past months, at Emma happily playing on her blanket, and finally at Dawson, the man who had saved them both in more ways than one. "I don't know," she admitted. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." Dawson nodded, rising to his feet. "You have time to decide, no need to rush." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I should check on the new calves. We've got 3 more expected tonight." Before Katherine could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the letter that promised freedom but suddenly felt like a different kind of trap. That evening, Dawson didn't join them for dinner, sending word through Jake that he was busy with a difficult calving. The next day, he was gone before dawn, returning long after Katherine had put Emma to bed. This pattern continued for a week, Dawson finding reasons to be away from the house, and when he was present, maintaining a politeness that felt worse than outright coldness. "Did something happen between you two?" Mrs. Winters finally asked, catching Katherine staring out the window at Dawson's retreating form one morning. "I'm not sure," Katherine replied honestly. "He's been different since the letter came." Mrs. Winters snorted. "Men. For all his virtues, that boy can be as thick-headed as his father was." "What do you mean?" The older woman fixed Katherine with a penetrating stare. "He thinks you're leaving. That money means you don't need him or this place anymore." "But I never said. Did you say you were staying, Mrs. Winters countered. Katherine bit her lip. "No, I don't know what I want yet." "Don't you?" Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. "Seems to me you've been happier these past weeks than any time since you arrived, and it's not just having a roof over your head that's done it." She left Katherine to ponder her words, which echoed in her mind as she went about her daily tasks. Was Mrs. Winters right? Had she already made her decision without realizing it? That night, after Emma was asleep, Katherine wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and ventured out to the barn where she knew Dawson often worked late. She found him mending a saddle by lantern light, his head bent to the task, unaware of her presence until she spoke. "You've been avoiding me," she said simply. Dawson looked up, surprise giving way to a carefully neutral expression. "Been busy with the calving. Is that all it is?" He set aside his work with a sigh. "What do you want me to say, Katherine?" "The truth," she replied, stepping closer. "Since the letter came, you've barely spoken to me." "We were," she hesitated, searching for the right word, growing closer. "And now you're 1,000 miles away." Dawson rose to his feet, his height making her tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "That money changes things for you. Gives you choices you didn't have before. And you assume one of those choices is to leave, isn't it?" he challenged. "You could go anywhere, start fresh, buy your own place. You don't need," he stopped abruptly. "Don't need what?" Katherine pressed. "Don't need you." The question hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Dawson looked away, his jaw tight. "I don't want to hold you here out of obligation or gratitude," he finally said. It's not what I want from you." Katherine moved closer still, until she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "What do you want from me, Dawson?" His gaze returned to hers, and the longing she saw there took her breath away. "Everything," he said hoarsely. "I want everything, Katherine. But only if you're offering it freely, because you want to stay, not because you feel you should." Katherine's heart pounded in her chest. "And if I said I don't want to leave, that Emma and I have found something here we never expected?" "What's that?" he asked, a spark of hope lighting his eyes. "A home," she said simply. "Not just shelter, but a real home, with you." Dawson's hands came up to frame her face, his touch reverent. "Are you sure? You barely know me," Katherine smiled, covering his hands with her own. "I know that you gave up everything you had to save two strangers. I know that you've been nothing but honorable and kind. I know that Emma lights up when you enter a room, and so do I." She took a deep breath. "I know that I'm falling in love with you, Dawson Reid." The words, once spoken, felt right in a way nothing had since Thomas's death, maybe even before. "Katherine," Dawson breathed her name like a prayer. "I've loved you since that first night on the porch when you trusted me enough to put Emma in my arms. I just never thought, then stop thinking," Katherine whispered, rising on her toes, "and kiss me instead." He did, gathering her close as if she were the most precious thing in the world. This kiss was different from their first, not a question, but an answer, a promise, the beginning of something neither had dared hope for. When they finally broke apart, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as my guest or employee. Stay as my wife if you'll have me." Katherine's heart soared. "Are you proposing, Mr. Reid?" A smile spread across his face, boyish and joyful. "I believe I am, Mrs. Sullivan," rather impulsively and without a ring, but sincerely. "Then yes," Katherine said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife. Yes to everything." Dawson laughed, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. When he set her down, his expression grew serious once more. "Your money, it's still yours. We'll put it away for Emma for her future." "Our future," Katherine corrected. "And we'll use some of it to rebuild your herd, the herd you sacrificed for us." "Our herd now," Dawson said. Everything I have is yours, Katherine, has been since the moment I saw you in that saloon. They were married 2 weeks later in the town church, with Emma cooing in Mrs. Winters's arms and the ranch hands serving as witnesses. Katherine wore a new blue dress bought with some of her inheritance money, and Dawson looked so handsome in his Sunday best that she could hardly believe he was really hers. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said, and Dawson did, tenderly and thoroughly, to the cheers and whistles of their makeshift family. The reception was held at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. When the last guest had gone, Dawson carried Katherine across the threshold of what was now their home, their room, their life together. Later, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Katherine marveled at the journey that had brought her here from the depths of despair to heights of joy she'd never imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Dawson asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moment of your life can lead to the best," she replied, nestling closer. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be here now, happy and in love, I wouldn't have believed them. If someone had told me I'd find my wife and daughter in a saloon in Redemption Creek, I'd have thought they were crazy," Dawson chuckled. "But here we are, Katherine echoed, her heart full. "And here we'll stay." Spring arrived in earnest, painting the ranch with wildflowers and new grass. The cattle Dawson had kept mostly breeding stock produced healthy calves, the first step in rebuilding their herd. With some of Katherine's money, they purchased additional cows and a prime bull, investments in their shared future. Emma thrived, growing from infant to toddler, taking her first steps in the ranch house parlor with both Katherine and Dawson cheering her on. She called him Da without prompting, as if knowing instinctively that blood mattered less than love when it came to fatherhood. One afternoon in late May, Katherine found Dawson on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same spot where she'd first seen her new home nearly a year before. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Beautiful day," she commented, following his gaze to where their cattle grazed in the lush pasture below. "Beautiful life," he corrected, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am." "It wasn't luck," Katherine said softly. "It was you making the choice to help us when no one else would. Everything good that's happened since started with that choice." Dawson turned to face her, his expression serious. "I'd do it again, in a heartbeat. Even knowing all the worry and fear along the way, I'd do it all again to end up here with you and Emma." Katherine smiled, leaning into his embrace. "So would I." As they stood there together, watching the sun set over their land, Katherine thought about the strange, twisting path that had led her to this moment. She had been sold with her baby for the price of a saddle, only to be saved by a cowboy who handed over his whole herd. But what she'd found in the aftermath wasn't just rescue, it was love, family, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. Some might call it fate or divine intervention. Katherine simply called it home. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the Reid ranch as Emma, now 6 and golden-haired like her mother, chased her 3-year-old brother Thomas through the yard. Behind them toddled little Sarah, barely 18 months old, determined to keep up with her siblings. Katherine watched from the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their 4th child grew. Dawson appeared from the barn, sweaty from the day's work but smiling at the sight that greeted him. "How are my girls doing?" he asked, climbing the steps to kiss Katherine's cheek. "We're fine," she assured him, guiding his hand to feel the baby's kick. "Active today." "Another Reid cowboy in the making," Dawson grinned, "or cowgirl," Katherine reminded him with a smile. "Emma's already better with the horses than half your hands." "True enough," he agreed proudly. "Jake says she's a natural." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's excited shout. "Papa, come see what I taught Ranger." Dawson winked at Katherine before heading off to see whatever new trick their daughter had taught her pony. Katherine watched them go, her heart full to bursting with love for this family they'd built together. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. The cattle herd was now 3 times the size it had been when Dawson sold most of it to save her and Emma. They'd added sheep the previous year, a venture that was already proving profitable. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, and they'd built new cabins for the additional hands they'd hired. But the true measure of their success, Katherine knew, wasn't in acres or animals or buildings. It was in moments like this: Dawson patiently listening to Emma's chatter, Thomas clinging to his father's leg, Sarah toddling after them all, secure in the knowledge that she belonged. As twilight descended, they gathered for dinner: the children, Katherine and Dawson, Mrs. Winters, who refused to retire despite their urging, and the hands who lived close enough to join them. It was noisy and chaotic and perfect. Later, after the children were asleep, Katherine and Dawson sat on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I got a letter from Frank Dawson's widow today," Katherine said quietly. Dawson stiffened slightly. "What did she want?" "Nothing. She was letting me know he died in prison last month." Frank had eventually been arrested for his trafficking activities, largely due to evidence Dawson had quietly gathered and provided to the authorities. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear it," Dawson said grimly. "Nor am I," Katherine admitted. "But it made me think about how different things might have been if you hadn't been in that saloon that day." "But I was," Dawson interrupted gently. "And you were strong enough to trust a stranger when you had every reason not to." Katherine smiled in the darkness. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Dawson corrected. "Best was agreeing to marry me." Debatable," she teased. "You did propose in a barn after all," Dawson laughed, pulling her closer. "Next time I'll do better. Flowers, champagne, the works." "Next time," Katherine raised an eyebrow. "For our 10th anniversary," he clarified. "I'll propose all over again, properly this time." "I'll still say yes," Katherine assured him, leaning up to kiss him softly. "Every time, in every way, I'll always say yes to you." As stars appeared in the vast Texas sky above them, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought them here, a journey that began with desperation and ended in boundless joy. She had been sold with her baby for the price of a saddle, until the cowboy handed over his whole herd. But what he'd given her wasn't just freedom or security or even love, though there was plenty of that. What Dawson Reid had really given Katherine was the chance to build a life worth living, a life filled with purpose and meaning and hope. And she had given him the family he'd longed for but never thought he'd have. Some bargains, it turned out, were worth far more than their price. "What are you thinking about?" Dawson asked, noticing her silence. Katherine smiled, taking his hand and placing it over their unborn child. "About value," she said. "About what things are really worth." "And what conclusion did you reach, Mrs. Reid?" "That some things can't be measured in dollars or cattle or land," she replied. "Some things are beyond price." Dawson nodded, understanding perfectly as he always did. "Like a family." "Like our family," Katherine agreed, settling back into his embrace. "Worth more than all the herds in Texas." And as the night deepened around their home, the home they'd built together through love and sacrifice and unwavering commitment, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had led her here, to this man, these children, this life. It was, quite simply, everything.